Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us today. This is Joe with the LSA, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar series. Today's webinar is titled The Future of Local Digital Media Sales, Inside, Outside, or In Between, and will be brought to you by Greg Sterling of LSA, Neil Polachek of Buzzboard, and Carrie Baldwin of Web.com. So with that, let's get started. Over to you, Greg.
Before we get into the subject matter of today's webinar, I just want to let people know about the upcoming LSA 15 conference. It's discounted registration, $200 off until February 20th, and you can see the agenda if you go to the URL at the bottom of the page. We're going to have a great event this year, lots of new people, new content, and I wanted to raise this now because the sales issues that we're going to get into in a minute are also reflected throughout the agenda, and so these themes and concerns and issues will be discussed throughout the conference, so there's a big tie in there. So I'd like to encourage you to come, take a look at the agenda, and give us any feedback if you have it. Next slide. Okay, as Joe mentioned, here are the speakers today, and of the three of us, it looks like Neil is having the best time in the picture. I'm sure he can tell us about that later. So thanks, Carrie and Neil, for being part of this, and I'm Greg Sterling, of course, recently joined the LSA, and hopefully today we're going to be bringing you some insight about the sales situation, the future of local media sales, digital sales, and small business issues. Next slide, please. These are the things that we're going to be talking about today. Digital only versus retrained reps, consultative selling, market segmentation, how you handle training generalists, specialists, telephone sales versus outside sales. What's the role of automation or tools and data in the sales process now, and how do you instill trust, differentiate in a very crowded and noisy marketplace, and we're going to get into issues of retention, and then there's some summary takeaways at the end. Now, we're not going to solve all of these things, and we don't have definitive answers to these questions. This webinar is intended to be a conversation about these issues with informed and thoughtful people, and this is why we want you to get involved. Most webinars, the audience passively looks at slides for, whatever the duration is, 45 minutes or half an hour, and then has a few questions at the end. But we want to do it differently. As Joe said, we want to get you to ask questions or make comments. If you have comments that aren't questions, feel free to input those, and we'll inject those into the conversation as we're going, and that's going to make it a lot better, a lot richer, and you'll get your particular issues raised or your questions answered. If you think we're saying something that's nonsensical, say that. If you think we've missed something, go ahead and say that. Put that information into the discussion. That way it'll be better for everybody, our speakers, Neil and Carrie, and then you guys also. Next slide, Joe, please. So I've got a few slides to kind of set up the conversation to provide some context, and then we're going to get into the discussion more broadly. So just a few years ago, this is what the local media landscape looked like. There were relatively few channels, some big players, a lot of money, but it was pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Next slide. Today it looks a lot more like this, right? I mean, this may or may not be 100% accurate, but this is the kind of thing that everybody is contending with. Competitors, small business owners, franchisees. It's a lot more confusing, a lot more complicated. Next slide, please. As a consequence, at least in the small business part of the market, but this is also true for national brands trying to localize their marketing, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of challenges with execution, everybody is frustrated, and there's a lot of fatigue as well. And this is true for sales organizations and especially for those on the receiving end of the pitches. Next slide, please. This is a Burrell Associates slide, but there are a number of surveys that have basically affirmed this, more or less. What's happening is that you've got lots of competitors, lots of parties, lots of channels making a lot of outbound pitches to business owners, whether it's on the phone or an email or to a lesser degree feet on the street. And this particular survey in 2013 found that on average, small businesses were getting roughly 5 calls a week or 20-plus calls a month, and they were listening to about 1 of them. They were taking only about 1 out of 5 pitches. Next slide, please. This is a survey that I participated in before I joined LSA, and we asked about 1,200 business owners a broad range of questions about digital marketing and their preferences. And this particular slide reflects the fact that small business owners would rather be contacted by email than by phone, and lastly, in person. They're least interested in being contacted in person by an outside rep, according to this particular slide. Now, this is almost entirely the reverse of what generates retention. So the premise rep, the telephone, and then self-service or email third in terms of their ability to retain advertisers. So there's an irony here that they don't really want to be contacted by humans, but that's much more effective, probably for closing as well as retention. Next slide. This is a high-level chart that just reflects the decline in revenue of traditional media in the local space. Newspapers have seen an enormous loss in revenue over the last 12, 13 years. Same is true for print yellow pages, and correspondingly online advertising has really taken off during that period of time. So the loss of those revenues has put, next slide please, an enormous amount of pressure on some of these organizations to make some changes, some structural changes. This is another Burrell data point. It just shows the different local media, the number of reps and managers, growth over the past couple of years, and just the salary levels. Next slide. This chart reflects the differences in the performance of digital reps and traditional reps in terms of digital media or digital ad products. So in other words, digital reps appear to generate about 4 times the digital revenue per rep of those who are selling both traditional media and digital advertising. What this does not reflect is the traditional media products that those reps are selling and the overall revenue that the traditional media rep may be bringing in. So it may be a little bit deceptive, but what it's designed to illustrate is that digital reps appear to do a much better job, digital-only reps appear to do a much better job selling digital than reps who have both traditional and digital products in their sales bag. Next slide. Lots of products, ever-increasing list of things that the local media rep is selling, SEO, listing syndication, mobile, social, reputation management, paid search, and so on and so forth. And there's no sign of stasis or stability here. I mean, it's a very, very dynamic product suite now that we're contending with. Next slide, please. So what you're seeing now is this increase in the number of products and the complexity of the sale, as well as lots of downward pressure on margins, digital margins, very different than traditional media margins, and competition, and then the loss of revenues, at least in the traditional media organization's case, is creating a kind of structural situation where they have to do more with less. They have to start to restructure the sales force. Next slide, please. So they're moving, in the traditional case, from an organization dominated by premise or outside reps largely to, next slide please, one which is much more telephone-centric, so lower overhead, lower cost of sales here, but there's some drawbacks there that we'll get into. Next slide. And this is all to avoid becoming a skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. No, extinction. This is the metaphor for extinction here. Next slide, please. So change is necessary. We're at a time of everybody on this call knows there's a lot of change in the air. People are having to try new things, restructure, etc. But there are a lot of questions about how to do this. And next slide, please. That's what we're going to get into. Again, these are the topics. We're going to start the conversation, and we'd like you to have a major role in this. Give us your comments, your questions as you hear things that you want to respond to. You hear questions that you want to, or you hear issues that you want answered. Please put those into the question box in the dashboard. So now I'd like to turn it back over. Next slide, please. To Neil and Carrie to talk a little bit more about their backgrounds, give you some context on who they are. So Carrie, why don't you start?
Absolutely. Thanks, Greg, and welcome everyone to the webinar today. So I'm Carrie Baldwin. I'm with Web.com. Been with Web for over 9 years now, and started out building our paid search marketing products as well as fulfillment for social media and SEO. To date, we've delivered over 80,000 campaigns since 2006. I'm currently overseeing our agency network program, where we are servicing small and mid-sized agencies, being their fulfillment arm for digital products. And for those that are familiar with Web.com or not, we do have a full suite ranging from domain registrations to hosting, website design, paid search, SEO, social media, et cetera. So essentially a one-stop shop for SMBs to be serviced online.
Okay, Neil, your turn.
So thanks, Greg, and Happy New Year to everyone. I've been studying this problem or this issue for a long time, formerly while I was at the Kelsey Group, BIA Kelsey, and since then I've been working with buzzword, which is really in the middle of all this transformation. buzzword, for those of you who don't know, is a sales engagement platform that's used by nearly 3,000 reps across the country and other parts of the world to help them go through this very difficult transformation phase. And so I'm seeing it now. I've seen it really from three perspectives, this problem. I actually sold Yellow Pages a while ago, a long time ago for sure. But the problems were not, it was still, you had to engage with the customers. Whether it was when I was doing it or today, it was easier then when I was selling because there were fewer products coming at these folks. But you still had to be authentic and you still had to engage. Then I sort of, when I was with BIA Kelsey, we were looking at this issue for a long time, the channel issue, the product issue, and all that sort of stuff from an analyst perspective. And now, being with the buzzword team in an advisor role, I see the very issues that all of these sales organizations balance with on a day-to-day basis. So that's really the context for which I see this, sort of the lenses I see this through. Greg?
Okay, great. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first area that we're going to get into is the question of the digital-only versus sales retraining of traditional reps. And this was something that was illustrated in that earlier Burrell slide. And here are some related questions. Can traditional reps be retrained to effectively sell digital products? Should companies build digital-only sales teams? Can digital-only teams coexist with traditional reps in the same organization? And what's the role of the sales management and how significant is their impact on success or failure? Do these guys need to be trained or retrained? So I want to invite Carrie and Neil just to jump in and take up one of these questions, and we'll go from there. And I want to invite the audience to submit their questions or comments as they occur. So Carrie or Neil, take it away.
Sure.
Carrie?
I'll go ahead and jump in. Yeah, I'll jump in first. Thanks, Neil. So I think the first question, can traditional media reps be retrained to effectively sell digital? I think the short answer is in some cases. I think it really depends on the sales rep. The difficult thing in converting a rep is you're taking them from being someone who's really a farmer mentality to someone who now has to be a hunter. So in the past, if they were selling print YT, they were relying primarily on brand recognition. Businesses knew that they had to be listed in the Yellow Pages. And the sales cycle was very different. It was a one-time-a-year sales cycle typically. So you have a rep who is banging on the door once a year. They knew they were going to get the sale. Hopefully they had an upsell as far as going from one price point to another. Now what we're asking these sales reps to do is if they're going to start selling digital packages, which isn't a one-time-a-year printing, digital is immediate, it's monthly, it's recurring, it could be semi-annually or quarterly. We're asking them now to sell a product that is different. It's something that isn't considered absolutely necessary by all SMBs. So I think taking a sales rep from somebody who has traditionally been able just to knock on the door once, sign the deal, and walk away every year, and having them now actually have to physically prospect, identify prospects, understand what their needs are, and consult with them is a pretty hard shift to make.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say that there are media companies, the newspapers, the radio industry, where it may be a little bit nuanced there because they do go out more often than once a year. So that piece of the equation may not be as challenging in those situations. I do think the notion of, for all of us, whether we're a sales rep or an analyst, retraining people is behavioral modification. It's changing the way we've done things over and over. I think tied to that is, you can't sort of think of this in a vacuum. You've got to consider the issue of compensation and commissions and how that's tied into this sort of retrain or reprogramming of salespeople. And, I think a lot of this becomes pretty dependent on the fourth bullet here, which is the role of the sales manager. And we've seen, certainly, the evidence we see from our lens at Buzzboard is that where you have sales managers who see their sort of tenure as 10 years and more, there's great adoption, there's great coaching, there's a lot of good stuff going on. Where you have situations where sales managers might see their tenure as 18 months or 2 years, they're just, you're not going to get a person whose timeline is 2 years more of work to do much behavioral or training modification. It's just not going to happen. So I think all of this is a function of where organizations are in their hiring practices and where they are in the timing of that sort of overall transformation or transition.
We've got some feedback a little bit on this notion of digital versus total sales, and some people are sort of pushing back indirectly against that slide I showed earlier. And I'm wondering, so one of the comments is if you're only focused on digital sales, then of course you have a higher digital sales average since you don't have as large a portfolio with various sales objectives to achieve. I wonder if you guys have a comment on that, or you can speak to an organization where there is a successful mixing of digital and traditional reps within that organization. So either way, comment on the comment or talk about a success story where you're seeing digital only and traditional reps coexist in an organization.
Well, I think the reason that slide may be misleading is because even a rep who's handling both, because they're coming into that situation with the customer with a pre-existing, fairly large spend on maybe it's banner, newspaper ads, print newspaper ads, or something, or spot radio ads, that transition into, sort of now I don't want to take that down to zero so fast because that's not good for my customer, it's not good for my compensation, it's not good for my margins. So that I think the slide is a little misleading in that respect. And that there are sales reps who are carrying both digital and traditional products that are successful, though the slide would suggest that they're not successful in the digital stuff. And it may be because that customer is buying some of their digital stuff from another organization. So, go ahead, Carrie.
Yeah, I would agree with that last statement, Neil, is that they may be buying products from other organizations, but at the same time, those reps who are only selling digital We don't quite know based on this chart what the product mix is from the digital only versus the digital and print. So the digital only may have access to a wider breadth of products in the digital space than the print rep does, possibly.
Right. And sometimes you see that where a traditional rep will sell a smaller assortment of digital stuff, in part because of training and product knowledge. And so they may not be selling SEM, for instance. They might sell website and paid placement stuff, but not search engine marketing. So I think the slide, is interesting, and it actually creates some interesting conversation.
Okay, so what's happening now, which is great, is we're getting a ton of questions. I've got questions coming in like every couple of seconds now. And so we're probably not going to be able to get to all of these, but we're going to try and get to as many of these as we can. One question is about suggestions to get traditional reps comfortable and confident with digital. I mean, are there any tactics or techniques that either of you have seen that really help traditional reps, become effective digital salespeople as well? Carrie, why don't you speak to that?
Yeah. So no, obviously at Web.com, we're not doing any traditional media sales, right? Everything that we do is digital. However, we have absolutely hired a lot of traditional media sales reps onto our sales team. And I think the best way that we found to get them acclimated to digital is absolutely extensive training. I think that's the first obvious thing. But then having them do a lot of ride-alongs, a lot of pairing up with other sales reps who are successful. One of the things that we really want to impress upon our sales reps is stick with the formula. We know that sales reps tend to have their own cadence or their own stylistic say about pitching, whatever it is. And so we really encourage them to mimic the very best sales reps and follow in their lead, do exactly what they're doing. So when we do that, we find that when we take a traditional media rep out of their element and you pull them into a digital-only element, we can absolutely be successful in transitioning them.
I think some of the tricks out there, Greg, are, reps have to engage in those platforms on their own as a consumer first off. If you have a rep who's never looked at Facebook and rarely goes on their phone to look at stuff and what have you, you're not going to make that transition. That rep's just not going to get there. But if they're already engaged in digital media as a user, because so much of what happens is our personal experience ends up coming back into our business experience, that if they're doing stuff on their mobile device or, if they're, doing a lot of social stuff on their own, then I think they can be, they're much more easily sort of trained and transitioned into this stuff. The other piece of that is, and it's one of the things that I know, Carrie, you all do, and one of the things that Buzzboard offers the rep, is a pretty intensive view of that merchant's digital footprint. So the more you do that, the more you get familiar with exactly how that merchant is seen by their customers. And as a consumer, that rep can sort of say, well, I looked at you here, or I saw that you weren't doing this. And practice is the ultimate sort of tool for enabling people to be comfortable in that domain. So, there are probably some tricks, but at the end of the day, it's got to be practiced. And you can't, it comes with the training and the doing.
Okay, a comment here. Traditional reps who understand the value of what they are carrying in their portfolio can more easily adapt to multi-product sales. It's less about tech expertise and more about teaching reps to be value experts who can put together valuable solutions within the budget of their advertiser, which is a good segue into the next slide, if my memory serves me, about consultative selling. So do either of you want to comment on that before we get into this slide, the audience statement that I just read about the value?
I would completely agree with that. I think that now in the digital space, the product development is so rapid. It's much more rapid, I think, than most of us can evolve and support. So that having a sales rep who is comfortable with digital, comfortable with any number of products, and able to easily add another trick to their bag is something that's really important, especially for us, because we do offer many different products, and rollout for us is increasingly important. We know that SMBs are finding new ways to promote themselves online, whether it's directories or social, paid, organic, any number of different social platforms that can pop up at any time. And so for us, being able to have a consultative sell where the sales rep is very much in tune with the digital space, he understands the value of each of those products, so that when he does a needs analysis with the client, he can understand and hone in on exactly which products are going to best suit them at the time.
I think the add to that is that consultative or consultative, or however you want to say it, also has to have the element of understanding that merchant's competition environment and the category that they operate in. And because, you know, I think that is increasingly, and we'll talk about this sort of in the segmentation piece, but I think that is the path to being truly consultative. You have to have sure that the understanding of that merchant's digital presence and even what they're doing in traditional media, I think, is important. But then layer on that who they compete with, how they compete with those folks, and within that context, category they're in. And I think that, you know, we're going to see more and more reps have domain-specific or category-specific knowledge to be successful, because these merchants are getting, you know, called upon by lots of other sellers, maybe vertical sellers, maybe it's the Henry Schein company selling medical supplies to the dentist or dental supplies to the dentist, or the tire folks selling tires to the tire dealer, who are going to start to have conversations around these topics. And those folks are going to have an advantage because they really understand those domains. So I think they're hand in hand.
So I apologize for the noise. That may be me that you're hearing. It's cold where I am, so I'm shivering a little bit. So hopefully I'll take care of that just by being still here. So again, thank you everybody in the audience for all your questions and comments. We've got a lot of very strong opinions that are coming through. It's really interesting to see these. We won't be able to get to everything, but try to get to as much as we can. I want to say that this webinar is based in part on this report that Neil and I wrote about the future of local media sales. Everybody will get a free copy of that after the webinar is over. You'll get a link to replay the webinar and a link to download the free report. So that's an additional piece of context for all of this. So here's somebody who says that consultative selling is very real. It can be done over the phone, but closing probably needs to be done in person. To get something, we must give something is the additional comment. So can you guys talk about the phone and what role the phone might play now in this new consultative model that's emerged, and this notion that closing has to be done in person? Comment on that if you could, Carrie and Neil.
Neil, do you want to take
I'll jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, I spent a lot of time looking at this company called Henry Schein, and some of you have heard this sort of mantra before, but they sell dental supplies to dentists. They've got a $9 billion company. A lot of that is done by phone, and the reason they can do it by phone, and they sell lots more money. The ticket, you know, the ARPU per dentist is way higher than what media folks sell them because it's all their supplies and stuff. But the reason they can do it is because they have really, really great insight into that merchant's business. Because they see how many gauze pads the dentist is ordering, they know whether that dentist business is going up or going down. So I think the question of can you do things over the telephone is more about how much information and insightful information can you get in front of that rep to have an engaging conversation. It's not about, yeah, it's great that you can shake a hand and look somebody in the eye and all that stuff, but technology is allowing everything but the warm handshake almost. The question is, how do you get the really valuable insights about that merchant's business in front of that rep? And I think, we're going to see technology play a bigger and bigger role in enabling that.
So, Carrie, before you comment on that issue of the phone, I've got an interesting comment here from somebody from GeoDigital, which is a Gannett unit, and he's saying that in order to really be effective over the phone, you've got to have a much more aggressive salesperson, somebody following the, quote, challenger sales model. So, Carrie, back to you.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really interesting question and comment. So we've definitely seen an evolution over the past several years on how we utilize our sales reps, whether they are premise or over the phone. Typically, our phone reps are tending to sell fewer products, very, very scripted conversations, lower ARPU. So that's historically how we've used them or used them. Our premise reps, of course, are selling a greater product suite, the more consultative sell, various price points, much greater in-depth needs analysis, and then the ARPUs are more than double. So we get greater value out of those. But what we're finding over time is that we're able to take the learnings that we have from our premise reps, apply them to our telephone reps, and we're actually starting to significantly increase the ARPU out of those reps, and they're becoming more consultative versus very scripted in their conversations. They're also being given access to additional products now, so instead of having a sales rep focus on one, maybe two products, now they're getting a full suite, just as our feet on the street reps would have. And so they're actually starting to be able to be more consultative, and we're starting to see their ARPUs go up. At the same time, we're actually leveraging the teams in tandem. So while 80% of our higher product leads would come through door knocking, actual feet on the street door knocking, 20% from our telephone sales teams, we're actually leveraging the telephone teams not only for inbound, but also follow-up calls if one of our premise reps sets up an appointment. So we're actually able to pass off appointments that are initiated in person and have somebody on the phone actually follow through with those. And so we're absolutely, I think that's a great question because we're seeing a very strong transition there.
I'd also say that I think there is, this whole notion of outside or inside. No outside rep engages all the time on-site in person. There's a lot of telephone conversations that go on. So is a presentation made on-site? Is the signature taken on-site? That may be where it becomes premise sales. But even today, there's, I think it, there's tons of stuff that's being done over the phone with a traditional premise sale person that I think is, again, has to be connected to that authentic, insightful conversation. And if it's done over the phone or done in person, what matters is that you're bringing value to that conversation.
So apropos of that comment, and sort of leading us into our next slide, I'll just read this verbatim, another comment. Everyone is talking as if the sales rep is the key. Isn't GoDaddy teaching us that the person who delivers the service can excel at upselling and matching needs better? So in other words, the account rep who's the ongoing point of contact for the advertiser, it becomes effectively, both the retention professional and a sales, person who's able to upsell that account. Comment on that, and that person is over the phone also. Comment on that if you could, and Joe, move us to the next slide if you could also do that.
Yeah, I can take that one to start with, Neil, if you like.
Sure.
So I would completely agree with that, and I think that's actually one of the differentiators that we use for our initial sales conversations, is that the post-sale support is going to be very strong for them. They're going to have a single point of contact account manager, somebody who's going to work with them, ensure that we're meeting the needs and the expectations and what the original stated ROI was. They're actually compensated on how well they're performing for that end advertiser. So for us, it's definitely a differentiator for us. We want to make sure that our account management is strong, and they are absolutely rewarded and incentivized for upsells and adding additional products to that SMB suite.
So I want to make a comment that goes back to something I don't recall whether it was Neil or Terry who said this, but the sales cycle and the customer touch points, right? I mean, in the old days it was annually or periodically, but it was not the kind of dynamic environment that we're in now. In some respects, and this is maybe Neil, you can jump off this. Isn't that sort of account person who's managing the ongoing relationship the much more important person than the rep who may have gotten in the door or made the initial sale?
Well, I think it's bigger than that. I think it is that account person, and then it's what's behind that account person. I hear stories that behind the account person, it can be spaghetti-like. In other words, there are all these different providers or vendors to these partners or these publishers out there, and a lot of these products, are hard to integrate. So that account manager has a particularly challenging task of making sure that, let's say this merchant bought 5 digital solutions, that those things are all fulfilled and executed according to what the rep sold, and then there are reports on those things. And if there are 5 different vendors of those things, we know that they cannot, that the ability for those 5 things to sort of integrate and provide a one dashboard, you're going to have 5 dashboards. And now you have an account manager trying to say to the merchant, well, I'm looking at this dashboard and this dashboard. So some of the really significant challenge, and I think this is tied to the whole notion of churn, is that you've got a lot of stuff going on in the background that, publishers are trying to keep sort of not let the merchant know that there's all this stuff going on, and that account manager is faced with a very monumental task in a lot of organizations to try and keep it all together, onboard it, execute it, fulfill it according to what the rep sold. So there are significant challenges there from what I've seen.
Two more comments that are related. First comment goes back to what you were talking about with sales, leadership, management. I want to just read this comment, and then I'm going to go on to another one, and either of you can refer or comment on these. So the first one is, we found that you can't leave anything to the rep to create on his or her own. Leadership must create every pitch process and then certify that each rep, in this case traditional rep, knows and can present that. This is the only way they'll be comfortable. This was a comment earlier on some training issues. And then a comment about customer service that goes back to this notion of the telephone upsell or the account rep that you were just referring to. This new environment of ongoing account management poses challenges. The comment is print media companies don't have a real history of good customer service. They have a fire and forget fulfillment model. So building good customer service culture and capability is a very challenging proposition as well. So if either of you want to comment on either of those things.
Well, think about it. If you roll back the tape 10 or 15 years, some of these companies had one product that they sold. And in that environment, customer service was pretty good, but not great. I mean, most studies would show that. Now you have companies that are selling, the rep is selling 5 and maybe 10 products, some of it traditional, some of it digital, some of it owned and operated media, some of it other people's media, some of it, provided by vendors or product, vendors out there. Think about the complexity that these organizations are transitioning through in order to make that a satisfying experience for the buyer of that program. That's a tall order. And so, I think we focus a lot of attention on the sales rep because they're kind of the person out there day to day, whether it's over the phone or in person. But there's a whole lot of of stuff that I think has to evolve and get much better and transition in the fulfillment side of all this. So it's very challenging. Did I answer your question, or did I just babble again, Greg?
You're babbling, but it's valuable nonetheless. So, no, I'm kidding. Yes, I mean, all of this is really great stuff, and there's a lot of debate and discussion coming through on these questions. And, you know, I wish we could get to every single one because there's a lot of great information and great opinions there, but I want to get to some of these other issues, and keep the questions and comments coming. I'll try to work as many in as I can. So, Carrie, I want to just have you address the issue of segmentation, since that's the slide in front of us. Can you talk to us about how Web.com broadly thinks about segmentation, and then this issue of generalists and specialists, and how that relates to particular products that you're trying to present? How is that all worked out organizationally?
Sure. So I would think for us, our basic segmentation is based on ARPU. So we have higher-end products that are typically sold and delivered through our premise channels versus lower-end products. Let's just take, for example, maybe a paid search package. We might be selling anything up to $1,000 through telephone sales. We can obviously go higher, but it's typically under that level. If we're going to go through premise, we're looking at anything $1,000 and up. Products may be a little bit different in how they're serviced as well. Most of the reps are going to tend to be generalists. The reason for that is we're in different markets. You couldn't necessarily have one rep that focused on one industry. You might saturate some of the smaller markets too quickly. We also want to make sure that if we're going to be hitting our revenue and sales targets, we need to be able to knock on as many doors as possible. I think there's some element of segmentation for a rep based on maybe sales rep personality, and this is just really rough. Let's say you have somebody you would consider more of a blue-collar sales guy. You're not going to put him in front of an attorney, for example, or a professional services firm. And so we will take sales reps and target them towards specific verticals based on personality and what type of client do we think that they're going to match up best. We want SMBs that we target to relate to the sales rep. If we have a rep who's come to us from a very specific industry, let's say the auto industry, and they're very well versed in that, we're absolutely going to leverage them in that way. If they're used to dealing with small ad agencies, we're absolutely going to leverage them in that way and give them specific targets. One of the other things that we do, I think, is a bit of a tip here, is for our reps, whether they be phone-based or field-based, is we actually encourage them to focus on one vertical a day. So, for example, let's say on Tuesday I'm going to focus on plumbers in my area. What that allows them to do is gain some efficiencies as they're doing their background research to find out who's a player in the space, who is deficient, who are their target prospects to get them to sign up for digital services. It makes it very easy and efficient for them to do their prep work to identify who those targets are. And then as they're having conversations throughout the day, they're keeping the industry jargon and lingo the same versus going from plumbing to pest control to a lawyer to a dentist, et cetera. And so that's one thing that we actually have our reps focus on. So at the end, we're generalists by trade. We're definitely not a find law, right? Anything like that. We're generalists because we're horizontal, but we do some unique things that help us focus on specific industries.
So it sounds like the primary, one second, Neil, but it sounds like the primary thing that you're organizing your sales force around is the account value. Is that a correct understanding? And then everything else is sort of secondary or more informal. Is that right?
That is correct. However, we are starting to see a shift where that is starting to blend a little bit, that the telesales teams are actually starting to move up the ARPU chain more rapidly than we would expect. And that's really just come from their comfortability in actually doing a consultative sale now. So they're just getting better at it. And that really goes back to what Neil talked about a little while ago, and that is those automation tools. Having access to tools that make them very efficient and very knowledgeable and consultative, it builds that trust with the SMB, so they're going to be more willing to spend more with you.
Okay, Neil, sorry.
I think there's another dimension. That's all right. I think there's another dimension on the segmentation that we're seeing a lot of our partners use, and that is really what I'd call the social segmentation. So looking at firmographics, are good signals. ARPU is a good signal, but we're also seeing our partners use social signals such as, if this merchant, has, 250 Facebook likes and their competitors have 20 or 25, I think that you can conclude that that merchant's pretty aggressive, and there's some opportunity there, even if they haven't spent a lot of money with you in the past. And conversely, you could even look at it the other way that says, okay, well, this merchant has no social activity going on. They're in a category where social is skews very high. That's an opportunity to move that person up the food chain. So, we're seeing partners use, some of those social signals and some of that to do a better job of targeting what they say to that merchant and even how they segment.
So somebody, on that comment, somebody says, I think the social signals are really a proxy for digital sophistication, which is certainly a useful signal. Neil, do you want to respond to that?
Could be. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And then in the context of their competitors, where are they relative to their competitors? Because then you can have a pretty engaging conversation to say, you've got 50 likes, your 5 closest competitors, are all over Twitter or all over Facebook or all over Instagram or whatever is sort of the next social platform of the day. Have you tried? What's your expectation? What's your plan? We can help you get there.
Okay, so with that, let's go, Joe, to the next slide. I want to read a comment, and then we'll get into this discussion. You guys have talked a little bit about data and research previously, but we're going to get into it in more depth here. The comment is, what does your process look like to make reps become more knowledgeable on the business, which is a perfect lead into this slide. Neil, you take this
that's a big key of the whole buzzword platform is that it delivers, what could be an hour, 45 minutes, hour and a half amount of data collection and research. It automates that in about 3 minutes for a customer. So, what we've heard from some of our partners is that, we believed that Buzzboard was going to reduce the amount of time spent on prepping for a customer. What our partners have told us is that that is true for some reps, but for many reps, there was not a lot of prep going on. And so that the automation is doing what, sales leadership had hoped was being done, but now it's getting done. So certainly technology is playing a big role in moving that rep up the curve, as Carrie said, and that's why their telephone people are able to have, work with higher ARPU customers, is because of that integration of and use of technology into providing insight and sort of authenticity to that rep.
Carrie, what about your organization? To what extent does automation exist, sales automation exist at all, and how is technology or the kinds of research that Neil alluded to playing out at web.com?
Sure. So we use a number of different automation tools, third-party tools as well as our own in-house tools. So for third-party, we're doing very similar to what Neil's talking about with Buzzboard. We are seeing what their presence is, whether it's social, organic, paid presence. And then for internal, we have our own tools that help actually customize packages and price points based on our own historical database of customer spend levels. So we're using all of those, and I think for us the importance of it is that it does incredibly reduces the amount of time it takes for a sales rep to identify good prospects. It makes their conversation more quickly. It gets them through the gatekeeper more easily as well.
Yep,
and so their productivity just absolutely goes up. I think one of the issues, one of the questions on the slide here is about, limits of automation. I think one of the things that we do struggle with is because we're using multiple tools, we're comparing data. Sometimes the data is a mismatch. It's not always the same. And then if you have to answer the SMB's or the customer's question about that, sometimes it's hard to really explain why data might be different in some cases. And so as I affectionately like to say, that some of these third-party tools are 75% right 50% of the time. So you can't completely trust them, but I think in general they actually give a very, very good guidance because we will use these tools, compare them to our own customers just to see how well they match up.
Mm-hmm. On that last bullet, I think the limits of tools or automation is that unless we remove the person from the conversation entirely, that person ultimately does have to present themselves as trusted and authentic. And the data helps them do that. But one of the great missing skills out there is listening skills. And you can't use technology to make a rep listen to the customer and then take that information and turn it into some solution. Listening is, I think, still a skill that is not taught enough. And because I've seen it, people just, talk over their customer. They're trying to sell them so much, and they don't step back and listen. Because most of the time, these customers will tell you everything you need to know if you just present a few questions and listen. So technology, that's going to fix that.
Does that advice apply equally for the telephone? And I mean, I know you're going to say yes, but is there a difference really? Let's go to the next slide. Actually, is there a difference between the final question? How can sales organizations better create a trusted relationship? Is there a difference in approach that a telephone or a premise rep needs to take in order to build that trusted relationship, or is that just a function of what you're describing, Neil, kind of genuinely listening and being present and authentic to that advertiser?
Look, these reps have very high productivity goals. I think that those goals sometimes come in conflict with, the ability to actually have a conversation and really listen to the merchant talk, whether it's frankly in person or over the phone. I think the phone is more challenged because the productivity measures are much more transparent when it's a phone organization versus an outside organization. So did I answer that question? I'm not sure. Carrie, why don't you jump in?
Sure. So I think the advantage would go to the premise rep in that case because you're able to walk in with something physical. You can show a physical report. You can pull up on your iPad how competitors are ranking. You can show social media signals. And so it kind of gives that advertiser the eureka moment when they compare themselves to where their competition is versus a telephone rep, which has to really probably describe it over the phone using words. Of course, you can email out. You could do a join me, something like that, a go-to meeting.
Yeah, screen share, sure.
Right, so we could certainly screen share that, but I think the advantage, again, goes to that premise rep because they're able to be in the physical presence of the customer. They have their full undivided attention, hopefully. They're sitting down with them and walking through these things, and generally you get a little bit more time with them when you do that.
Yeah.
And so for us, I think those tools absolutely create that trusted relationship that we're finding is really important to us at a local level. That's why we're aggressively expanding our local premise sales force, because we recognize that so many small businesses simply do not want to work with a company who would be considered a national company. They really want to have that relationship with somebody local to them, shares their same area code. And so we're taking advantage of that.
I'm getting a lot of affirmation of the comment about listening, genuinely listening, building the right solution, not just trying to sell, not just pushing a package that's profitable. So that point is really resonating with people who are responding. I want to ask Carrie and then Neil, on this slide we're talking about the churn problem. We're not going to really we don't have enough time to really get into that in too much depth, but I'd like you to speak to what can be done to improve retention. If you had to point to one or two things, either from an organizational standpoint or just philosophically, what would you say is most important for folks to improve retention of their advertisers?
Yeah, I think real quickly.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. I think real quickly for us, being able to truly demonstrate ROI. We sell our largest packages based on lead ranges. For X dollars, we're going to deliver a range of X to Y calls for you. These are going to be valid leads for you. But then for that SMB to translate those calls or leads into actual sales and revenue, that's kind of the missing link for us, is being able to solve that problem, and we find that that's one of our greatest churn drivers. We know we're delivering value because we can see it metric-based, but the end advertiser can't always see that. So in order for us to solve that problem, we either A, have to figure out how do we translate that to a sale, what kind of systems can we put in place to do that. It's difficult to solve. On top of that, it's really continuing that local communication and relationship. So right now we may have a premise rep doing the sales. They're still going to maintain a relationship with that client because they want to continue to upsell to them over time. They're incentivized to do so. But the person really becomes linked to their account manager, which is, of course, headquartered out of Jacksonville, Florida. And so it's really important for us to maintain the relationship between that AM and that sales rep and the client. If we can do that better, we're going to be able to reduce churn.
Okay, so Neil, since we're starting to run out of time here, I mean, this is a great conversation. We could go on for another half hour.
I was just going to say,
what's your, one point about retention. Go ahead.
I'd go back to listening, because what happens, I think, a lot is people don't hear what the customer says or needs. They build a program that's disconnected from that. Then you got to implement a program that has some of the spaghetti stuff going on behind it, and you can just see why it happens. And I think those are the listen, and then on the back end, how do you take that spaghetti and make it much more streamlined so that those products are almost integrated?
Oh, I want each of you to give one or two high-level points, or make them concrete. But I'm contradicting myself. One or two concrete points. Sorry. About differentiation. Lots of noise, lots of competitors selling more or less the same product suite. What is the key to differentiating in the market? One or two very concrete things. Carrie, why don't you start?
Sure, I think it's actually brand building. And so first it's building your brand. If you're not really a national brand and you are a local brand, you need to do that through social media, your reputation, evangelize through your existing clients. So that's one that's important to us. The other is being able to be flexible with the product suite, being able to provide what SMBs need, and as Neil said, after consulting, asking the right questions. But being able to do those two things, I think, are the most important.
Back to listening. I think I'm going to start running a class in listening skills. Big opportunity.
Well, can you give us any concrete examples from your client base, the buzzword client base, that you've seen particularly effectively around differentiation? Is there anything out there that you?
Well, I think it comes down to that authenticity. Is that instead of having conversation that says, "Are you doing Facebook?" or "How is your Facebook activity going?" You got to be able to say, "I see that you have garnered 172 likes. Now, how's that going?" Now that connects what they're doing and what they've done or struggled to do with a question that's about how maybe I can help them. So if you don't have that 172 likes and can connect it to what they've done, then you're just another person saying, "I can help you with your Facebook stuff." So it's being able to have that insight that suggests to that merchant that I actually know a little bit more about your business than the average rep coming in here.
So knowledge, authenticity, listening.
Yep.
So Joe, we're coming to the end of this very rapidly. We've only got a couple more slides that we just want to get through, and then we will give you the links to the replay and also to the white paper that you can get for free. I just want to read these through quickly and then turn it back over to Joe. And I want to thank Carrie very much and Neil for your time and your thoughtful comments, and everybody in the audience for all the great comments and questions, at least 40% of which I couldn't get to because there were so many. So thank you again. It's made it much better for everyone. So takeaways here that Carrie and Neil supplied in advance of the discussion today. Reps need to be savvier. SMBs are sophisticated, and they want the rep to understand and help them solve these very real problems around marketing. Automation tools, more extensive training required. This, again, to SMB expectations, they need to have a more comprehensive understanding of the landscape, including things that they don't sell. There's no formula for T-sales versus inside sales. There are some drawbacks to each. inside reps need to really be enabled, given lots of data and training. Outside sales, we've heard the virtues of that from Carrie, and walking away carries risks for traditional media organizations that are segueing away from outside sales. Sales management was a theme today. In a number of the comments, both from the audience and from the speakers, there's too much focus on rep training, not enough on sales management training. Next slide, please, Joe. Again, back to the notion of listening and authenticity. You need to have an authentic, real conversation and use data and research as evidence of the knowledge of the business. Pre-call planning can be aided by data and these tools that we were discussing. Category knowledge, verticalization, and credibility to the conversation. As a basic matter, reps have to be, and sales organizations have to be flexible and adaptable. The market is very dynamic, and new products are coming in and out of the market, with regularity. So adaptation is a key. And something we didn't get into, unfortunately, but that's related to that, is that products have a life expectancy. And I think, Carrie, this was yours. Social may be one of those that ebbs and flows in terms of its importance. Consumers are fickle, and business owners will reflect that consumer marketplace to some degree. So, again, thanks to everybody. Now, Joe has a few final words before we let everybody go. So back to you, Joe.
So yeah, just a few more comments. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Neil, for attending or for hosting today's webinar. I just wanted to make one comment. We have next week, we'll be giving a sneak preview into our new local media performance and planning tool that we're calling LSA Insights. With data from thousands of campaigns spanning the local media spectrum, the tool is intended to help you develop smarter client strategies, sales aids, thought leadership, ad publishing tactics, corporate strategy, and a whole bunch more. So if you are interested in participating in this webinar, visit localsearchassociation.org/webinars. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.